The Natural by Bernard Malamud. Roy Hobbs felt a splurge of freedom at the view of the western hills. Lying back, elbowed up on his long side, sleepless still despite the lulling train, he watched the land flowing and waited with suppressed expectancy for a sight of the Mississippi, 1,000 miles away. Dropping to all fours, he peered under the berth for his bassoon case. Though it was there, he thought he'd better open it, and did, but quickly snapped it shut as Eddie, the porter, came walking by. "Mornin', maestro, what's the tune today?" "It ain't a musical instrument." Roy explained it was something he had made himself. "Animal, vegetable, or mineral?" Roy laughed. "How far to Chicago, Eddie?" "Shy? Oh, a long, long ways. I wouldn't walk." "I don't intend to." After a troublesome shave in which he twice drew blood, Roy hurried through the large windowed club car, through several sleepers, a lounge, and another long line of coaches till he came to the last one, where amid the gloom of drawn shades and sleeping people tossed every which way, Sam Simpson also slept, although Roy last night had begged him to take the berth, but the soft-voiced Sam had insisted. "You take the bed, kiddo. You're the one that has to show what you've got on the ball when we pull into the city. It don't matter where I sleep." Sam lay very still on his back, looking as if the breath of life had departed from him, except that it was audible in the ripe snore that could be chased without waking him, Roy had discovered, if you hissed scat. Roy decided not to wake Sam, and left. He returned to the vacant club car and sat there with a magazine on his knee. The train had begun to slow down, then stopped. The desolate station gave up a single passenger, a girl in a black dress, who despite the morning chill waited with a coat over her arm and 2 suitcases and a zippered golf bag at her feet. Hatless, too, her hair a froth of dark curls, she held by a loose cord a shiny black hat box, which she wouldn't let Eddie touch when he gathered up her things. Her face was striking, a little drawn, and pale, and when she stepped up onto the train, her nylon legs made Roy's pulses dance. The girl entered the club car and directed Eddie to carry her suitcases to her compartment, and she would stay and have a cigarette. He mentioned the hat box again, but she giggled nervously and said no. He shrugged and left. She had dropped a flower. Roy thought it was a gardenia, but it turned out to be a white rose she had worn pinned to her dress. When he handed it to her, her eyes widened, as if she had recognized him from somewhere. But when she found she hadn't, her expression changed instantly. Sitting across the aisle from him, she fished out of her purse a pack of cigarettes and a lighter. She lit up and, crossing her heartbreaking legs, began to flip through a copy of Life. He figured she was his own age, maybe a year or so older. She looked to him like one of those high-class college girls, only with more zip than most of them, and dressed for 6 a.m. as the girls back home never would. He was marvelously interested in her, so much had her first glance into his eyes meant to him, and already felt a great longing in his life. Anxious to get acquainted, he couldn't figure out how to begin. If she hadn't eaten breakfast yet, and he could work up the nerve, he could talk to her in the diner. Only he didn't dare. When he entered the club car after making sure Roy was elsewhere, Sam headed for the bar, already in a fluid state, for the train was moving through wet territory. But then he changed his mind and sat down to size up the congregation over a newspaper and spot who looked particularly amiable. The headlines caught his eye at the same time as they did a short, somewhat pop-eyed gent sitting next to him, who had just been greedily questioning the husky, massive-shouldered man on his right. Popeyes nudged the big one, and they all three stared at Sam's paper. West Coast Olympic athlete shot. Follows 24 hours after slaying of All-American football ace. The article went on to relate that both of these men had been shot under mysterious circumstances with silver bullets from a .22 caliber pistol by an unknown woman that police were on the hunt for. "But why with silver bullets, Max?" "Beats me. Maybe she set out after a ghost, but couldn't find him." The other fingered his tie knot. "Why do you suppose she goes around picking on athletes for?" Sam looked up and almost hopped out of his seat as he recognized them both. Hiding his hesitation, he touched the short one on the arm. Excuse me, mister, but ain't you Max Mercy, the sports writer?" The sports writer wore a comical mustache and dressed in stripes that crisscrossed three ways: suit, shirt, and tie. "That's right," he said. "I am Sam Simpson. Bub Simpson, that is, who played for the St. Louis Browns in the season of 1919 to 1921. "Believe I've heard the name," Mercy said. He nodded toward the man Sam knew all along as the leading hitter of the American League, 3 times winner of the Most Valuable Player award, and announced, "This is Walter the Whammer Wambold." "Howdy," Sam said. "You sure look different in street clothes." The Whammer, whose yellow hair was slicked flat, with tie and socks to match, grunted. Sam then remarked to Mercy that he was traveling with a slam-bang young pitcher who'd soon be laying them low in the big leagues. "Spoke to you because I thought you might want to know about him." "What's his name?" "Roy Hobbs." "Where'd he learn to pitch?" "His daddy taught him years ago. He was once a semi-pro. And I have been polishing him up." "Where's he been pitching?" "Well, like I said, he's young, but he certainly mowed them down in the Northwest High School League last year. Thought you might have heard of his 8 no-hitters." "Class D is as far down as I go," Mercy laughed. "I'm personally taking him to Clarence Mulligan of the Cubs for a tryout." Roy popped his head into the car and searched around for the girl with the black hat box. Miss Harriet Bird, Eddie had told him, and seeing her seated near the card tables restlessly thumbing through a magazine, popped out. "That's him," said Sam. "Wait till I bring him back." He got up and chased after Roy. "Who's the gabber?" said the Whammer. "Guy named Simpson who once caught for the Brownies. Funny thing, last night I was doing a Sunday piece on drunks in baseball, and I had occasion to look up his record. He was in the game 3 years, batted .340, .260, and .198, but his catching was terrific. Not one error listed." "Get rid of him. He jaws too much." "Shh! Here he comes." Sam returned with Roy in tow. "Max," said Sam, "this is Roy Hobbs that I mentioned to you. Say hello to Max Mercy, the syndicated sports writer, kiddo." "Hello," Roy nodded. "This is the Whammer," Max said. Roy extended his hand, but the Whammer looked through him with no expression whatsoever. Seeing he had his eye hooked on Harriet, Roy conceived a strong dislike for the guy. The Whammer got up. "Come on, Max. I want to play cards." Max rose. "Well, hang on to the water wagon, bub," he said to Sam. Sam turned red. Roy shot the sports writer a dirty look. "Keep up with the no-hitters, kid," Max laughed. Towards late afternoon, the Whammer, droning on about his deeds on the playing field, got very chummy with Harriet Bird, and before long had slipped his fat fingers around the back of her chair, so Roy left the club car and sat in the sleeper, looking out of the window, across the aisle from where Eddie slept, sitting up. Gosh, the size of the forest. He thought they had left it for good yesterday, and here it still was. But then the pine trees flowed away from the train and slowly swerved behind blue hills, and on the plain lay a small city gleaming in the rays of the declining sun. Approaching it, the long train slowly pulled to a stop. Eddie woke with a jump and stared out the window. "Uh-oh, trouble. We never stop here." He looked again and called Roy. "What do you make out of that?" About 100 yards ahead, where 2 dirt roads crossed, a Model T Ford was parked, and a fat old man wearing a broad-brimmed black hat and cowboy boots climbed down from it. To the conductor he flourished a yellow telegram. They argued a minute, then the conductor, snapping open his watch, beckoned him along, and they boarded the train. When they passed through Eddie's car, the conductor called to Eddie. "Half hour." "Half hour," Eddie yodeled, and he got out the stool and set it outside the car so that anyone who wanted to stretch could. Only about a dozen passengers got off the train, including Harriet Bird, still hanging on to her precious hat box, the Whammer, and Max Mercy, all as thick as thieves. Roy and Sam both got off. "Well, I'll be jiggered." Sam pointed down about a block beyond where the locomotive had halted. There, sprawled out at the outskirts of the city, a carnival was on. "Come on," said Roy. Sam stopped to have a crushed coconut drink which he privately spiked with a shot from a new bottle, while Roy wandered over to a place where you could throw 3 baseballs for a dime at 3 wooden pins, shaped like pint-sized milk bottles, and set in pyramids of 1 on top of 2, on small raised platforms about 20 feet back from the counter. He changed the 50-cent piece Sam had slipped him on leaving the train, and this pretty girl in yellow, who with her peanut of a father was waiting on trade, handed him 3 balls. Roy won himself a naked Cupid doll. Enjoying the game, he laid down another dime, again clattering the pins to the floor in a single shot and now collecting an alarm clock. With the other 3 dimes, he won a brand-new box baseball, a washboard, and a 6-inch harmonica. A few kids came over to watch, and Sam, wandering by, flipped Roy another $50. But this time the little man behind the counter nudged his daughter, and she asked Roy if he would now take a kiss for every 3 pins he tumbled. Roy glanced at her breasts, and she blushed. "What do you say, Sam? It's your 4 bits." Sam bowed low to the girl. "Ma'am," he said, "now you see how dang foolish it is to be a young feller." The girl laughed, and Roy began to throw while the girl counted aloud the kisses she owed him. Some of the people from the train passed by and stayed to watch when they learned from the mocking kids what Roy was throwing for. The girl told off the 3rd and 4th kisses. As Roy fingered the ball for the last throw, the whammer came by, holding over his shoulder a Louisville slugger that he had won for himself in the batting cage down away. Harriet, her pretty face flushed, had a Cupid doll, and Max Mercy carried a box of cigars. Roy raised his arm to throw for the 5th kiss and a clean sweep when the whammer called out to him in a loud voice, "Pitch it here, Busher, and I'll knock it into the moon." Roy shot for the last kiss and missed. He missed with the 2nd and 3rd balls. The crowd oohed its disappointment. "Only 4, said the girl in yellow as if she mourned the 5th. Angered at what had happened, Sam hoarsely piped, "I got $10 that says he can strike you out with 3 pitched balls, Whambold." The whammer looked at Sam with contempt. "What'd he say, Max?" he said. Mercy shrugged. "Oh, I love contests of skill," Harriet said excitedly. Roy's face went pale. "What's the matter, Hayfoot? You scared?" the whammer taunted. "Not of you," Roy said. "Let's go across the tracks where nobody'll get hurt," Mercy suggested. Sam cornered one of the kids who lived nearby and sent him home for a fielder's glove and his friend's catcher's mitt. While they were waiting, for protection he buttoned underneath his coat the washboard Roy had won. Max drew a batter's box alongside a piece of slate. He said he would call the throws, and they would count as one of the 3 pitches only if they were over or if the whammer swung and missed. When the boy returned with the gloves, the sun was going down, and though the sky was aflame with light all the way to the snowy mountain peak, it was chilly on the ground. Breaking the seal, Sam squeezed the baseball box, and the pill shot up like a greased egg. He flipped it to Roy. "Better throw a couple of warm-ups." "My arm is loose," said Roy. "It's your funeral." He cautioned Roy to keep his pitches inside, for the whammer was known to gobble them on the outside corner. Sam returned to the plate and crouched behind the batter. Roy drew on his glove and palmed the ball behind it. Mercy, rubbing his hands to warm them, edged back about 6 feet behind Sam. The onlookers retreated to the other side of the track, except Harriet, who stood without fear of fouls up close. Her eyes shone at the sight of the 2 men facing one another. Mercy called, "Batter up!" The whammer crowded the left side of the plate, gripping the heavy bat low on the neck, his hands jammed together and legs plunked evenly apart. His eye on Roy said it spied a left-handed monkey. "Throw it, Rube, it won't get no lighter." Roy's heart skipped a beat. He turned to gaze at the mountain. Sam whacked the leather with his fist. "Come on, kiddo. Wham it down his whammy." The whammer out of the corner of his mouth told the drunk to keep his mouth shut. "Burn it across his button." "Close your trap," Mercy said. "Cut his throat with it." "If he tries to dust me, so help me, I will smash his skull," the whammer threatened. Roy stretched loosely, rocked back on his left leg, twirling the right a little like a dancer. then strode forward and threw. At 33, the whammer still enjoyed exceptional eyesight. He saw the ball spin off Roy's fingertips, and it reminded him of a white pigeon he had kept as a boy. He was conscious of its bird form and white flapping wings until it suddenly disappeared from view. He heard a noise like the bang of a firecracker at his feet, and Sam had the ball in his mitt. Unable to believe his ears, he heard Mercy intone a reluctant strike. Sam flung off the glove and was wringing his hand. "Hurt you, Sam?" Roy called. "No, it's this dang glove." Though he did not show it, the pitch had bothered the whammer no end. Not just the speed of it, but the sensation of surprise and strangeness that went with it. Him batting here on the railroad tracks, the crazy carnival, the drunk catching and a clown pitching, and that queer Dame Harriet, who had 5 minutes ago been patting him on the back for his skill in the batting cage, now eyeing him coldly for letting one pitch go by. He noticed Max had moved farther back. "How the hell you expect to call him out there?" "He looks wild to me." Max moved in. Sam crouched with his glove on. "Do it again, Roy. Give him something similar." "Do it again," mimicked the whammer. To the crowd, maybe to Harriet, he held up a vaunting finger showing there were other pitches to come. Roy pumped, reared, and flung. The ball appeared to the batter to be a slow, spinning planet looming toward the earth. At last it drifted within range of his weapon, or so he thought, because he lunged at it ferociously, twisting round like a top. He landed on both knees as the world floated by over his head, and hit with a whoop into the cave of Sam's glove. "Strike!" Mercy called long after a cheer, was it a jeer, had burst from the crowd. "What's he throwing?" the whammer howled. "Spitters?" "Into pig's poop," Sam thrust the ball at him. "It's drier than your granddaddy's scalp." The whammer felt oddly relieved. He liked to have his back crowding the wall, when there was a single pitch to worry about and a single pitch to hit. Then the sweat began to leak out of his pores as he stared at the hard, lanky figure of the pitcher, moving despite his years like a veteran undertaker of the diamond. Roy raised his leg. He smelled the whammer's blood and wanted it. The third ball slithered at the batter like a meteor, the flame swallowing itself. He lifted his club to crush it into a universe of sparks, but the heavy wood dragged, and though he willed to destroy the sound, he heard a gong-bong and realized with sadness that the ball he had expected to hit had long since been part of the past. And though Max could not cough the fatal word out of his throat, the whammer understood he was, in the truest sense of it, out. The crowd was silent as the violet evening fell on their shoulders. The whammer trotted off to the train, an old man. The ball had caught Sam smack in the washboard and lifted him off his feet. He lay on the ground. Roy pushed everybody aside to get him air. Unbuttoning Sam's coat, he removed the dented washboard. "Never meant to hurt you, Sam." "Just knocked the wind out of me," Sam gasped. "Feel better now." He was pulled to his feet and stood steady. The train whistle wailed, the echo banging far out against the black mountain. The conductor popped open his watch. "All aboard!" he called. "Aboard!" Eddie echoed. They sat after dinner in Eddie's dimmed and empty Pullman, Roy floating through drifts of clouds on his Triumph, as Harriet went on about the recent tourney. He grinned, carried away by the memory of how he had done it. The hero who with 3 pitched balls had nailed the best the American League had to offer. What didn't that say about the future? He felt himself falling into sentiment in his thoughts and tried to steady himself, but couldn't before he had come forth with a pronouncement. "You have to have the right stuff to play good ball, and I have it. I bet someday I'll break every record in the book for throwing and hitting." Harriet appeared startled, then gasped, hiding it like a cough behind her tense fist, and vigorously applauded, her bracelets bouncing on her wrists. "Bravo, Roy, how wonderful!" "What I mean," he insisted, "is I feel that I have got it in me, that I am due for something very big. I have to do it. I mean," he said modestly, That's, of course, when I get in the game." Her mouth opened. "You mean you're not?" She seemed disappointed, almost on the verge of crying. "No," he said, ashamed. "Sam's taking me for a tryout." Her eyes grew vacant as she stared out of the window. Then she asked, "But, Walter, he is a successful professional player, isn't he?" "The whammer?" Roy nodded. "And he has won that award 3 times. What was it?" "The most valuable player." He had a panicky feeling he was losing her to the whammer. She bit her lip. "Yet you defeated him," she murmured. She sighed and edged closer to him, concealing the move behind a query about the bassoon case. "Do you play?" "Not music," he answered. "There's a thing in it that I made for myself." "What, for instance?" He hesitated. "Oh, a baseball bat. I call it Wonder Boy." She laughed merrily. "Roy, you are priceless." Then he was aware of her leg against his, and that she was all but on his lap. His heart slapped against his ribs, and he took it all to mean that she had dropped the last of her interest in the whammer and was putting it on the guy who had buried him. As they went through a tunnel, Roy placed his arm around her shoulders, and when the train lurched on a curve, casually let his hand fall upon her full breast. The nipple rose between his fingers, and before he could resist the impulse, he had tweaked it. Roy was dreaming of an enormous mountain, Christ, the size of it, when he felt himself roughly shaken. It was Eddie holding a lit candle. "The fuse blew, and I've had no chance to fix it." "What's the matter?" "Trouble. Your friend has collapsed." Roy hopped out of the berth, stepped into moccasins, and ran, with Eddie flying after him with the snuffed wax, into a darkened car where a pool of people under a blue light hovered over Sam, unconscious. "What happened?" Roy cried. "Can't say. We're picking up a doctor." Sam was lying on a bench, wrapped in blankets with a pillow tucked under his head, his gaunt face broken out in sweat. When Roy bent over him, his eyes opened. "Hello, kiddo," he said in a cracked voice. "What hurt you, Sam?" "Where the washboard banged me. But it don't hurt so much now." "Oh, Jesus." "Don't take it so, Roy. I'll be better." Roy got up. Sam shut his eyes. The train whistled and ran slow at the next town, then came to a draggy halt. The trainman brought a half-dressed doctor in. He examined Sam and straightened up. "We got to get him off into the hospital." Roy was wild with anxiety, but Sam opened his eyes and told him to bend down. "Take my wallet out of my rear pocket." Roy pulled out the stuffed cowhide wallet. "Now, you go to the Stevens Hotel." "No, oh no, Sam, not without you." "Go on, kiddo. You got to. See Clarence Mulligan tomorrow, and say I sent you. They're expecting you. Give 'em everything you've got on the ball. That'll make me happy." "But Sam, you got to. Bend lower." Roy bent lower, and Sam stretched his withered neck and kissed him on the chin. "Do like I say." "Yes, Sam." A tear splashed on Sam's nose. Sam had something more in his eyes to say, but though he tried and became agitated, he couldn't say it. Then the trainman came in with a stretcher, and they lifted the catcher and handed him down the steps. And overhead the stars were bright, but Roy knew he was dead. Roy stared down at the lit sprawl of Chicago, standing higher than he had ever in his life, except for a night or two on a mountain. Here, with the earth laid out in small squares so far below, he knew he would go in tomorrow and wow them with his fast one, and they would know him for the splendid pitcher he was. The telephone rang. He was at first scared to answer it. In a strange place, so far from everybody he knew, it couldn't possibly be for him. It rang again. He picked up the phone and listened. "Hello, Roy. This is Harriet." He wasn't sure he had got it right. "Excuse me?" "Harriet Bird, silly." "Oh, Harriet." He had completely forgotten her. "Come down to my room," she giggled. and let me say welcome to the city." "You mean now?" "Right away." She gave him the room number. "Sure." He meant to ask her how she knew he was here, but she had hung up. Then he was elated. So that's how they did it in the big city. He walked, it seemed ages because he was impatient, through a long corridor till he found her number and knocked. "Come on in." Opening the door, he saw her standing shyly in the far corner of the room, naked under the gossamer thing she wore, held up on her risen nipples and the puffed wedge of hair beneath her white belly. A great weight went off his mind. As he shut the door, she reached into the hat box which lay open next to a vase of white roses on the table. In her hand she held a squat, shining pistol. He cried out in a gruff voice, "What's wrong here?" She said sweetly, "Roy, will you be the best there ever was in the game?" "That's right." She pulled the trigger. The bullet cut a silver line across the water. He sought with his bare hands to catch it, but it eluded him and bounced into his gut. A twisted dagger of smoke drifted up from the gun barrel. Fallen on one knee, he groped for the bullet, sickened as it moved and fell over as the forest flew upward, and she, making muted noises of triumph and despair, danced on her toes around the stricken hero. "Oh, well, I should have been a farmer," Pop Fisher said bitterly. "I should have farmed instead of playing wet nurse to a last-place dead-to-the-neck ball team." They were sitting in the New York Knights dugout, scanning the dusty field, the listless game and half-empty stands. "It's tough," said Red. He kept his eye on the pitcher. "Should have had some runs. Bump had 4 for 4 in the first and 2 hits before he got himself chucked out of this." Pop's face burned. "Oh, don't mention that 8-man to me. Getting himself bounced out of the game the only time we had runners on base was when he come up." "Well, I'd have thrown him out, too, if I was the ump, and he slid dry ice down my pants." Somebody in street clothes came up the stairs and asked the player at the end of the bench, "Who's Fisher?" The player jerked his thumb, and the man, dragging a large, beat-up valise and a bassoon case, treaded his way to Pop. Pop exclaimed, "Oh, my 8-foot uncle, what have we got here, the Salvation Army Band?" Pop saw a tall, husky, dark-bearded fellow with old eyes, but not bad features. His face was strong-boned, if a trifle meaty, and his mouth seemed pleasant, though its expression was grim. "The only music I make," he answered Pop, patting the bassoon case, "is with my bat." Searching through the pockets of his frayed and baggy suit, he located a letter that he handed over to the manager. "I'm your new left fielder, Roy Hobbs." "Oh, did my what?" Pop exploded. "It says in the letter." Pop read it in a single swoop, then shook his head in disbelief. "Scotty Carson sent you?" "That's right." Pop shot him a shrewd look. "You're 35 if you're a day." 34. 34? Holy Jupiter, mister, you belong in an old man's home, not baseball." The players along the bench were looking at him. Roy licked his lips. "You ever been in organized baseball?" "I only recently got back in the game." "Oh, what do you mean, got back?" "Used to play in high school." Pop snorted. "Oh, Scotty signed him and the judge okayed it? They can't do that," he said to Red. "That thief in the tower might have 60% of the stock, but I have it in writing that I am to manage this team and approve all player deals as long as I live." "I got a contract," said Roy. Roy pulled a blue back paper out of his inside coat pocket. "Oh, let me see it." Pop scanned it. "Who needs a fielder old enough to be my son?" "I got a left fielder," he said to Roy. "A darn good one when he feels like it. Ain't playing practical jokes on everybody." Roy stood up. "If you don't want me, Merry Christmas." "Wait a second," said Red. He fingered Pop up close to the fountain and spoke to him privately. Pop calmed down. "Oh, I'm sorry, son," he apologized to Roy when he returned to the bench. "But, well, you came across me at a bad time. But Like Red says, if our best scout sent you, you must have showed him something. Go on in the clubhouse and have Dizzy fit you up with a monkey suit. Then report back here and I will locate you a place on this bench with the rest of my all-stars." He threw the players a withering look, and they quickly turned away. The locker room was clouded with steam when Roy came in. He could see the trainer working on a man mountain on the rubbing table. Catching sight of Roy, the trainer called out in an Irish brogue, "Who was he looking for?" "Prop man," Roy said. "Hey, that's Dizzy down the hall." Roy went down the hall. He located the prop man in a baseball jersey sitting on a uniform trunk with his back to the wall. He was reading the sports page of the Mirror. "The name's Roy Hobbs. New hand here. Fisher told me to get outfitted." "New man, fielder, eh?" Roy nodded. Dizzy came forth with the tape measure and took Roy's measurements. Then he went back and collected a pile of stuff from the shelves. "Try this for size." Dizzy asked him to sign for the stuff. Judge Banner insisted. He helped Roy carry it to his locker. Roy stood the bassoon case in upright. "Got a lock for the door?" "Well, nobody locks their doors here. Before the game, you deposit your valuables in that trunk there, and I'll lock 'em up." "Okay, skip it." Dizzy excused himself to get back to his paper. The locker room was tomb-like quiet. As he put his things away, Roy heard the sound of voices through the trainer's half-open door. He recognized first the trainer's brogue, and then a big voice that he did not so much recall as remember having heard throughout his life. The big voice of a heavy, bull-necked, strong-muscled guy, the kind of gorilla he had more than once fought half to death for no reason he could think of. Oh, the whammer, he thought, and quickly remembered the whammer was almost 50 and long since retired out of the game. But what made him most uneasy was a third voice, higher than the other two, a greedy, penetrating, ass-kissing voice he had definitely heard before. He strained his ears to hear it again, but the big voice was talking about this gag he'd pulled on Pop Fisher, spraying white pepper in Pop's handkerchief, which made him sneeze and constantly blow his beak. And this caused an epidemic of base stealing, to Pop's fury, because the signal to steal that day was for him to raise his handkerchief to his schnozzle. At the end of the story, there was a guffaw and a yelp of laughter. Then this other voice, one that stood on stilts, commented that Bump certainly got a kick out of his jokes, and Bump said Pop wouldn't agree to his release, so if he was going to be stuck in this swamp, he would at least have a little fun. The voice Roy didn't like changed the subject and wanted to know from Bump if there was any truth to the rumor about him and Pop's niece. "Nah," Bump said, and cagily asked, "What rumor?" "That you and Memo are getting hitched." Bump laughed. "She must have started that one herself." "Then you deny it?" The door was shoved open and Bump waltzed out in his shorts, as husky, broad-backed, and big-shouldered as Roy had thought, followed by the trainer and a slightly pop-eyed gent dressed in an expensive striped suit, whose appearance gave Roy a shooting pain in the pit of his stomach. Max Mercy. Bump paraded over with his hairy arm outstretched. "Hiya, Buster. You the latest victim they've trapped?" Roy felt an irritable urge to pitch his fist at the loudmouth, but he nodded and shook hands. "Welcome to the lousiest team in the world, barring none," Bump said. "And this is old Doc Casey, the trainer, and the hawksaw with the eyes is Mac Mercy, the famous sports columnist. Most newspaper guys are your pals and knowing to keep their traps shut, but to Max, private life is a personal insult." Max, whose mustache and sideboards were graying, laughed hollowly. He said to Roy, "Didn't catch the name." "Roy Hobbs," he said stiffly. But no one seemed to think it mattered very much. The game was over, and the players hoofed through the tunnel into the locker room. They tore out of their uniforms and piled into the showers. Some stayed in only long enough to wet their skins. Wiping themselves dry, they tumbled into street clothes. When Pop came in, he was startled to see Roy sitting there in the gloom, and asked what he was waiting for. "No place to go." "Why don't you get a room?" "Ain't got what it takes." Pop looked at him. Scotty paid you your bonus cash, didn't he? $200, but I had debts. Oh, tonight you better come along with me to the hotel, and tomorrow you can find a place to suit your needs. At the Midtown Hotel, Pop spoke to the desk clerk, and he assigned Roy a room on the 9th floor, facing toward the Empire State Building. A phone jangled, and after a minute, Roy got around to lifting it. "What's the matter?" Red Blow barked. "Don't you answer your telephone?" "I like it to ring a little. Gives them a chance to change their mind." "Who?" "Anybody." Red paused. "Well, Pop asked me to show you around. When are you eating?" "I am hungry now." "Well, meet me in the lobby 6:30. As Roy hung up, there was a loud dum-diddy-dum-dum-dum on the door, and Bump Bailey in a red-flowered Hollywood shirt breezed in. "Hiya, Buster. Saw you pull in with the old geezer and tracked you down. I'd like for you to do me a favor." Roy's the name. "Roy is fine. Listen, I got my room on the 4th floor, which is a damn sight classier than this mousetrap. I'd like you to borrow it, and I will borrow this for tonight." "What's the pitch?" "I'm having a lady friend visit me, and there are too many nosy people on my floor." Roy considered and said okay. He unconsciously wet his lips. Bum slapped him between the shoulders. "Just stick around, Buster. You will get yours." Roy knew he would never like the guy. Bump told him his room number, and they exchanged keys. Then Roy put a few things into his valise and went downstairs. Coming along the 4th floor hall, he saw a door half open and figured this was it. As he pulled the doorknob, he froze. For there, with her back to him, stood a slim, red-headed girl in black panties and brassiere. She was combing her hair. When she saw him in the mirror, she let out a scream. He stepped back as if he'd been kicked in the face. Then the door slammed, and he had a splitting headache. Bump's room was next door, so Roy went in and lay down on the bed. He lay there till the pain in his brain eased. At 6:30 he went down and met Red, in a droopy linen suit, and they had steaks in a nearby chop house. Roy had two, and plenty of mashed potatoes. Afterwards they walked up 5th Avenue. He felt better after the meal. In the lobby, Red said he'd enjoyed Roy's company, and they should eat together more. Roy said goodnight and went upstairs. For a while he stood at the window and watched the lit Empire State Building. It was a great big city, all right. He undressed and got into bed. In the dark, the bed was in motion, going round in wide, sweeping circles. He didn't like the feeling, so he lay deathly still, tensed and sweating, and groaned aloud. Why did it have to be me? What did I do to deserve it? Seeing himself again, walking down the long, lonely corridor, carrying the bassoon case, the knock, the crazy Harriet with the pistol, and him, cut down in the very flower of his youth, lying in a red pool of his own blood. "No," he cried. "Oh, no," and lashed at his pillow, as he had 1,000 times before. Finally, as the sight of him through the long, long years of suffering faded away, he quieted down. He thought he'd fallen all but deep asleep when a door seemed to open in the mind, and this naked, red-headed lovely slid out of a momentary flash of light, and the room was dark again. He thought he was dreaming, but the funny part of it was when she got into bed with him. He almost cried out in pain as her icy hands and feet, in immediate embrace, slashed his hot body, and he found what he wanted, and had it. Arriving at the clubhouse the next morning, Roy headed for his locker. He opened the door and found his new uniform knotted up, dripping wet, on a hook. The boys let out a bellow of laughter. Bump just about doubled up, howling. Roy then realized the bassoon case was missing. It startled him that he hadn't thought of it before. "Who's got it, boys?" But no one answered. Roy saw that Bump had broken open the case and was about to attack Wonder Boy with a hacksaw. "Lay off that, you goon." Bump turned and stepped back with the bat raised. Roy grabbed it and with a quick twist tore it out of his sweaty hands, turning him around as he did and booting him hard with his knee. Bump grunted and swung, but Roy ducked. Bump was sweaty and sore. "You're a lousy sport, Alfalfa." "I don't like the scummy tricks you play on people you've asked for a favor," Roy said. "I hear you had a swell time, Wonder Boy." "What's going on in there?" Pop's shrill blast came from inside the locker room. "You're all out, men. On the double." The players scurried past Pop and through the tunnel. I felt better. Dizzy hustled up a makeshift rig for Roy. He dressed and polished his bat, a little sorry he'd lost his temper, because he'd wanted to speak quietly to the guy and find out whether he was expecting the redhead in his room last night. The field was overrun with droopy players. Half a dozen were bunched near the gate of the cage, waiting to be pitched to by Al Fowler, whom Pop had ordered to throw batting practice for not bearing down in the clutches yesterday. Some of the men were at the sidelines throwing catch. No one seemed to be thoroughly awake, but when Roy went into the batting cage, they came to life and observed him. Fowler, a southpaw, was in a nasty mood. When Roy came up with Wonder Boy, he pitched the ball at Roy's head. Roy hit the dirt. Pop shrieked, "Ah, cut that out, you blasted fool!" Fowler wanted to make Roy look silly and burned the next one in. Roy swung and the ball sailed over the right field fence. Red-faced, Fowler tried a hard, sharp-breaking curve. Roy caught it at the end of his bat and pulled it into the left field stands. "Well, try this one, Grandpa." Fowler flung a stiff-wrist knuckler that hung in the air without spin before it took a sudden dip, but Roy scooped it up with the stick and lifted it 20 rows up into the center field stands. Pop called out, "Let me see that bat, son." Both he and Red examined it. "Oh, where'd you get it?" Pop asked. Roy said he'd made it himself. "What, did you brand this name Wonder Boy on it?" "That's right." Pop was all smiles. "Well, Red'll measure and weigh it. If there's no filler and it meets specifications, you'll be allowed to use it." "There's nothing in it but wood." Red clapped him on the back. "I feel it in my bones that you will have luck with it." Pop sent Roy out to left field, and Earl hit fungos to him all over the lot. Roy ran them down well. He took one shot over his shoulder and two caroming off the wall below the stands. When Bump got around to his turn in the cage, he whammed 5 of Fowler's fast pitches into the stands. Then he trotted out to his regular spot in the sun field, and Earl hit him some long flies, all of which he ran for and caught with gusto, even those that went close to the wall, which was unusual for him because he didn't like to go too near it. Practice picked up. The men worked faster and harder than they had in a long time. Pop suddenly felt so good tears came to his eyes, and he had to blow his nose. There were days when Roy could feel the strength draining from his bones, weakening him so he could hardly lift Wonder Boy. He was unwilling to move then for fear he would fall over on his puss and have to crawl away on all fours. Nobody noticed he did not bat when he felt this way except Pop, and Bump, seeing how white his face was, squirted contemptuous tobacco juice in the dust. Then when Roy's strength ebbed back, he would once again go into the batter's cage and do all sorts of marvelous things that made them watch and wonder. He watched them, and he had to laugh. They were a nutty bunch to begin with, but when they were losing, they were impossible. Not much different from the fans in the patched and peeling stands. The place often resembled a zoo full of oddballs. Many of them came just to get a laugh out of the bonehead plays. Some, when the boys were losing, cursed and jeered, showering them, whenever they came close enough, with rotten cabbages, tomatoes, and occasionally an eggplant. Surprisingly, however, a few players were chosen for affection, and even admiration, by their fans. Fans like Otto P. Zip, the dwarf, whose self-chosen mission was to rout the critics of Bump Bailey, most of whom razzed the big boy for short-legging on the other fielders. The dwarf honked a loud horn at the end of a 2-foot walking stick, and it sounded as if a flock of geese had been let loose. Zip was present at every home game, sitting at the rail in short left field, and Bump made it his business, as he trotted out to his position at the start of the game, to greet him with a loud kiss on the forehead, leaving Otto in a state of dreamy bliss. Roy got to know them all except one, Memo Paris, Pop's red-headed niece, who sat in the wives' box behind third base. He could, if she would let him, find her with his eyes shut, with his hands alone, as he had in the dark. Always in the act of love she lived in his mind, the only way he knew her, because she would not otherwise suffer his approach. He was to blame. She had wept one bitter midnight, so she hated his putrid guts, whenever he got up from his seat in the hotel lobby as she stepped out of the elevator to say how sorry he was for beginning at the wrong end. She tugged at her summer fur piece and breezed by him in green-eyed scorn, withering in the process Bump at the cigar stand, who had laughed aloud at Roy's rout. "Honey bunch," he had explained, "it was out of the pity of my heart that I took that schmo into my room, because they didn't have one for him, and I was intending to pass the night at the apartment of my cousin from Mobile. How'd I know you'd go in there when you said you weren't speaking to me?" Memo punished him with silence, punishing herself, and he knew it, because she still came every day to see him play. Roy everlastingly fried Bump Bailey in the deep fat of abomination. On the 21st of June, the Knights began a series with the second-place Phils. Instead of falling into a swoon, the team played its best ball in weeks. The Phils couldn't score till the top of the 8th, when with 2 outs Schultz weakened, walking one man and handing the next a good enough throw to hit for a sharp single, so that there were now men on first and third. Up came Rogers, the Phil's slugger, and hit a fast curve for what looked like no more than a long fly ball, a routine catch to left center. Bump was nearer to the ball than Flores, but he was feeling horny in the sun and casting about in his mind for who to invite to his bed tonight. He still had time to get under it, but then saw Flores going for it like a galloping horse, so he decided to let him have it. At the last minute, he tried to take it away from the Mex, risking a head-on collision, but the wind whipped the ball closer to the wall than he had bargained for, so Bump fell back. The ball fell between them, good for a double and scoring 2 of the Phils. Pop tore at what was left of his gray hair. When Bump returned to the dugout, Pop cursed him from the cradle to the grave, and for once, Bump had no sassy answers. The rain washed out the Phils series, but the Knights were starting another with the 7th-place Redbirds. In batting practice, Roy looked tremendous, but so did Bump. For the first time in a long while, Roy went out to left field to limber up. Bump was out there too, and Earl swatted fungos to both. As they were changing into clean uniforms before the start of the game, Bump warned Roy in front of everybody, "Just stay out of my way, Busher, or you'll get your head bashed." Roy squirted spit on the floor. Bump was a bang-up fielder that day. He accepted 8 chances, twice chasing into center field to take them from Flores. Still not satisfied, he pounded like a bull after his 9th try, a smoking ball that sailed up high, headed for the wall. As Bump ran for it, he could feel fear leaking through his stomach. He ran harder, and with a magnificent twisting jump he trapped the ball in his iron fingers. Yet the wall continued to advance, and though the red-headed lady of his choice was on her feet, shrieking, Bump bumped it with a skull-breaking bang, and the wall embraced his broken body. On the day after the accident, Pop soberly gave Roy the nod to play in Bump's place. As Roy trotted out to left, Otto Zip was in his usual seat, but looking worn and aged. The Redbirds' probing armor belted the ball to him whenever they could, but Roy took everything they aimed at him. Once he put his head down and ran ahead of a shot going into the concrete. Though the crowd rose with a thunderous warning, he caught it with his back to the wall and did a little jig to show he was alive. For his performance that day, there was much whistling and applause, except where he would have liked to hear it, an empty seat in the wives' box. His batting was no less successful. He stood at the plate lean and loose, right-handed with an open stance, knees relaxed and shoulders squared. The pitchers tried something different every time he came up, sliders, sinkers, knucklers, but he swung and connected, spraying them to all fields. He was, Red Blow said to Pop, a natural, though somewhat less than perfect because he sometimes hit at bad ones, which caused Pop to mutter something about this bad ball hitter he knew who had reached for a lemon and cracked his spine. But the only thing Roy cracked that day was the record for the number of triples hit in a major league debut, and also the one for chances accepted in the outfield. Everybody agreed that in him the Knights had uncovered something special. When Bump died, Memo went wild with grief. Pop, who hovered over her at first, found her in bed clutching strands of red hair. Her cheeks were scratched, the tears rolled down. He was frightened and urged her to have the doctor, but her piercing screams drove him away. After unnumbered days, when the July stifle drove her out of her room, she appeared in the hotel lobby in black, and Roy was moved by her appearance. He had tried lately to forget her, but had a long memory for what he wanted, so there was only this to do, wait till she came in out of the rain. Then one day she shed black and put on white, but still looked as if she were wearing black. Only now, when he looked at her, she sometimes glanced at him. He watched her dislike of him fade to something neutral, which he slowly became confident he could beat. So he blazed away for her with his golden bat. It brought him some wondrous averages in hits, runs, RBIs, and total bases, and for the period of his few weeks in the game, he led the league in homers and triples. However, his accomplishments were not entirely satisfying to him. He was gnawed by a nagging impatience. So much more to do, so much of the world to win for himself. The team were doubtful he could go on like this, but his example was having a good effect on them. Before long they had dislodged the Reds, who had been living on the floor above them since the season started. Near the end of July they caught up with the Cubs, and 12 games behind the leading Pirates, took possession of 6th place. A new day dawned on Knight's Field. Looking down upon the crowds from his office in the curious tower he inhabited that rose above the main entrance of the ballpark, Judge Goodwill Banner was at first made uneasy by what he saw. However, the sound of the merry, clicking turnstiles was more than he could resist, so he put on extra help to sweep the stands and ramps and dust off seats that hadn't been sat in for years. Pop soon got into the spirit of winning, lowered the boom on his dismal thoughts, and showed he had a lighter side. He was in the driver's seat. His muscles eased, the apoplexy went out of his system, and for his star fielder, a love light shone in his eyes. It came about that Roy discovered Memo at one of the home games, though not as formally sitting in the wives' box. Happening to meet her later, he said, "Memo, I don't know what more I can do to show you how sorry I am about that time and tell you how I feel in my heart for you now." But Memo stared at him through a veil of tears and said, "I'm strictly a dead man's girl." He figured she had to be made to forget. If she would go out with him, he would give her a good time. But to do that and buy her some decent presents, a guy needed cash. And on the meager $3,000 he got, he had beans, barely enough to pay his hotel bill. So one day, after a long double-header, both ends of which the Knights finally took, Roy climbed the slippery stairs up to the tower to the judge's office. The judge, a massive rumpled figure in a large chair before an empty mahogany desk, was wearing a black fedora with a round pot crown and smoking, under grizzled eyebrows, a fat Black King Oscar I. "Nice of you to come," he rumbled. "To what good cause may I attribute this pleasant surprise?" Roy thought he'd better get down to brass tacks. "Well, Judge," he said, "I thought you might be expecting me to drop in and see you. You know what I am doing to the ball, both here and on the road. The papers have been writing that you might be considering a new contract for me." The judge blew at the ash of his cigar. Roy grew restless. "I figure $45,000 is a fair price for my work." "He that maketh haste to be rich shall not be innocent," spoke the judge. "Well, Judge," said Roy, "I'm 34 going on 35. That's not haste. That's downright slow." The judge rose. "I shall have to ask you to fulfill the obligations of your contract." Roy got up. "I wouldn't exactly say you were building up my goodwill for next year." "I have learned to let the future take care of itself." The judge took some papers out of a drawer. "I presume these are your signatures?" "That's right." "The first acknowledging the receipt of 2 uniforms and sundry articles?" "Right." "And the second indicating the receipt of a 3rd uniform?" "That's what it says." "You are entitled to only 2. Here, therefore, is a bill to the amount of $51 for property destroyed. Will you remit, or shall I deduct the sum from your next check?" "I didn't destroy them. Bump did." "They were your responsibility." Roy picked up the receipts and bill and tore them to pieces, then blew the whole business over the judge's head. The scraps of paper fluttered down like snow on his round hat. "The interview is ended," snapped the judge. "How'd you make out, kid?" It was Max Mercy, lurking under a foggy street lamp at the corner. The sight of the columnist did not calm Roy as he came out of the tower. "I don't want his dirty eyes peeking into my past. What luck for me that I had Sam's wallet in my pocket that night, and the cops wrote down his name. This creep will never find that out or anything else about me unless I tell him, and the only time I'll do that is when I am dead. Listen, El Smiro, he said, why don't you stay home in bed? Max laughed hollowly. You're a public figure. You gotta give the fans something once in a while to keep up their goodwill to you. Roy thought a second. Okay, tell him my cheapskate of a boss has turned me down flat on a raise and I am still his slave for a lousy $3,000. Max wrote a hasty note in his black book. Listen, Roy, let's you and I have a little chin-chin. Have you had your supper yet? No. Then have a steak with me at the pot of fire. Okay with me. He was in a mood for something for nothing. In the cab, Max said, You know, sometimes I get the funny feeling that I have met you someplace before. Is that right? Inside the club, the show was on. The customers guffawed and applauded. Come on, Max said. The captain had recognized him and was beckoning them to a ringside table. Roy sat down. Max looked around and bounced up. See a party, I know. Be right back. The band struck up a number, and the chorus wriggled out amid weaving spotlights for the finale. Max was back. Yeah, we're changing tables. Gus Sands wants us with him. Who's he? What do you read, the podunk pipsqueak? They call him the Supreme Bookie. He nets at least $10 million a year. Also, somebody you know is with him. Who's that? Memo Paris. Roy got up. He followed Max across the floor to Gus Sands' table. Memo was sitting there in a black strapless gown and wearing her hair up. The sight of her, so beautiful, hit him hard. Beside her, a semi-bald dome rose up, and Roy found himself staring into a pair of eyes, a mournful blue one and the other glowing weirdly golden. The bookie, a long stretch of bone, rose to his full height. The angle at which the spotlight had caught his glass eye changed, and the eye became just a ball of ice. He shook hands with Roy. Glad to meet you, Slugger. Why don't you sit down? Roy sat down, facing Memo, but she barely glanced at him. Her chair was close to Gus's. Once he chucked her under the chin, and she giggled. It sickened Roy because it didn't make sense. Let me buy you a drink, Slugger, Gus said, pointing to his own scotch. No, thanks. Clean living, eh? The eyes, Roy said, pointing to his own. Gotta keep 'em clear. Gus beamed. Well, how'd it go today, Slugger? Fine, Roy said. He got 5 for 5 in the first and 4 hits in the nightcap, Max explained. Say, what do you know? Gus whistled softly. That'll cost me a pretty penny. He focused his good eye on Roy. I was betting against you today, Slugger. You mean the Knights? No, just you. Didn't know you bet on any special player. On anybody or anything. Today we lost on you. Some other time we will clean up double. How'll you do that? When you're not hitting so good. How'll you know when to bet on that? Gus pointed to his glass eye. The magic eye, he said. It sees everything, and it tells me. Stakes came, and Roy cut into his. Want to see how it works, Slugger? Let's you and I bet on something. I got nothing I want to bet on, Roy said. Let's play, some kind of a number, Gus said. What kind? Well, of the amount of bills you're carrying on you. A slow flush crept up Roy's cheek. I'll bet, 300 I can guess by $1 either way how much you have got on you now, Gus said. Oh, you're on. Roy's voice was husky. Gus covered his good eye. His glass eye stared, unblinking. $10, he announced. Roy's throat went dry. He drew his wallet out of his pants pocket. Max took it from him and loudly counted up a 5 and 4 single-dollar bills. 9! He slapped the table and guffawed. Wonderful, Memo murmured. Well, 300 I owe you. Forget it, Slugger. Maybe someday you might be able to do me a favor. They were all suddenly silent. What kind of favor? Roy asked. When I am down and out, you can buy me a cup of coffee. They laughed, except Roy. Roy led the attack against the Phils that sank them twice, sweeping the series for the Knights and raising them into second place, only 3 games behind the Pirates. The newspapers called the Knights the wonder team of the age and said they were headed for the pennant. On his way to Memo's after the game, Roy met her, wearing her summer fur piece, coming along the 4th floor hall. I thought I would drop around and see how you are, Memo. She continued her slightly swaying walk to the elevator. I am all right, she said. He asked her to go to the movies. Sorry, Gus is picking me up. Well, the next day against the Braves, Roy got exactly no hits. The Knights won, but against the Dodgers in Brooklyn on Tuesday, he went hitless once more, and they lost. As his hitlessness persisted, everyone was astonished. It didn't seem possible this could happen to a miracle man like Roy. Enemy pitchers were the last to believe the news. They pitched warily, fearing an eruption of his wrath, but before long they saw the worry in his eyes. It made many a pitcher feel like a pretty tough hombre to see Roy drag himself away from the plate and with lowered head enter the dugout. What's the matter with me, he thought with irritation. He didn't feel himself. Wondered if he could possibly be sick. He felt blunt and dull, all thumbs, muscles, and joints. Charlie horse all over. In the end, he sought out Red Blow, drew him out to center field, and asked in an embarrassed voice, Red, what is the matter with me that I am not hitting them? Red squirted tobacco juice into the grass. Well, he said, what's worrying your mind? Roy was slow to reply. I am worrying that I'm missing so many. Well, I mean besides that, you haven't knocked up a dame, maybe? No. Are you doing something you don't like to do? Such as what? Well, once we had a guy here whose wife made him empty the garbage pail in the barrel every night, and believe it or not, it began to depress him. One night he told her to take the damn garbage out herself, and the next day he hid again. No, nothing like that. Pop's advice was more practical. Roy visited the manager in his office after the next fruitless game. What do I have to do to get out of this? Roy asked moodily. Pop looked at him over his half-moon specs. Well, nobody can tell you exactly, son, but I'd say right off, stop climbing up after those bad balls. Roy shook his head. I don't think that's it. Pop looked grimly at Wonder Boy. Don't you think you ought to try another stick for a change? Sometimes that'll end up a slump. Roy wouldn't hear of it. Wonder Boy made all of my records with me, and I'm staying with him. Whatever is wrong with me, and not my bat. Pop looked miserable, but didn't argue. The other Knights were once more afflicted by bonehead plays, failing to step on base on a simple force, walking off the field with 2 out as the winning run scored from first, attempting to stretch singles into triples, and they were not ashamed to blame it all on Roy. It didn't take the fans very long to grow disgusted with their antics. Some of them agreed it was Roy's fault for jinxing himself and the team. Otto Zip reappeared like a bad dream with his loud voice and pesky tutor venomously hooting Roy into oblivion. Seeing all this, Pop was darkly furious. Oh, it's a gosh damn bat, he roared one forenoon in the clubhouse. When will you get rid of that danged Wonder Boy and try some other stick? Never, said Roy. Then rest your ass on the bench. So, Roy sat out the game on the far corner of the bench from where he could watch Memo, lovelier than ever, in a box up front, in the company of 2 undertakers, the smiling one-eyed Gus, and Mercy, whose lead that night would read, Hobbs is benched. The All-American out has sunk the Knights into 2nd Division. The morning they came into Chicago, Roy shared a cab with Pop and Red. As the cab pulled up before the hotel, a wild-eyed man in shirt sleeves rushed up to them. Any of you guys Roy Hobbs? "Oh, that's him," Pop said grimly, heading into the hotel with Red. "No autographs." Roy ducked past the man.
"Oh, Jesus God, Roy," he cried in a broken voice. "Don't pass me by, for the love of God."
"What do you want?" Roy stared.
"Roy, you don't know me," the man sobbed. "My name's Mike Barney. I don't want a thing for myself, only a favor for my boy Pete. He was hurt in an accident playing in the street. They operated on him for a broken skull, and he ain't doing so good. The doctor says he ain't fighting much."
Mike Barney's mouth twisted and he wept.
"Pete's a fan of yours, Roy. Yesterday they let me go in and see him, and I said to Pete, you told me you'd sock a homer for him in the game tonight. After that, he sort of smiled. They're going to let him listen a little tonight, and I know if you'll hit one, it'll save him."
"Well, why'd you say that for?" Roy said bitterly. "The way I am now, I couldn't hit the side of a barn." Holding Roy's sleeve, Mike Barney fell to his knees.
"Oh, please, you gotta do it."
A crowd had collected and was watching them. "I will do the best I can if I get the chance." Roy hurried into the lobby, but Pop had other plans. "Oh, you're still on the bench, Roy, unless you put that Wonder Boy away and use a different stick." Roy shook his head, and Pop gave the lineup card to the ump without his name on it. When Mike Barney, sitting a few rows behind the box above third base, heard the announcement, his face broke out in a sickish sweat. It was a clear, warm night, and the stands were just about full. Though unhappy not to be playing, Roy, for no reason he could think of, felt better in his body than he had in a week. Mike Barney was directly in his line of vision, and sometimes stared at him. Roy's gaze went past him, farther down the stands, to where a young black-haired woman, wearing a red dress, was sitting at an aisle seat in short left. He could clearly see the white flower she wore pinned on her bosom. She seemed to spend more time craning to get a look into the Knights' dugout, at him, he could swear, than in watching the game. She interested him, and he would have liked a close gander at her. In the eighth, on a double and sacrifice, Pop worked a runner around to third. The squeeze failed, so he looked around anxiously for a pinch hitter. Catching Roy's eye, he said, as Roy had thought he would, "Well, take a decent stick and go on up there." Roy didn't move. There was a commotion in the lower left field stands. This lady in the red dress, whoever she was, had risen, and standing in a sea of gaping faces, seemed to be searching for someone. Then she looked toward the Knights' dugout. Roy couldn't stand it any longer. Placing Wonder Boy on the bench, he rose and stood abjectly in front of Pop. Pop looked up at him. "Oh, you win," he said. "Go on in." Roy gulped. "With my own bat?" Pop nodded and gazed away. As Roy walked out into the light, a roar of recognition drowned the announcement of his name, but not the loud beating of his heart. Lon Toomey, the hulking cub hurler, who had twice in the last 2 weeks handed Roy his lumps, smiled behind his glove. He fingered the ball, reared and threw. Roy at the plate watched it streak by. "Strike!" He towed in, his fear returning. What if the slump did not give way? Toomey lifted his right leg high and threw. Roy swung from his heels at a bad ball, and the umpire sneezed in the breeze. The lady in the stands hesitantly rose for the second time. The fans behind her hooted, "Hey, down in front!" But though her eyes showed she was troubled, she remained standing. Noticing Toomey watching her, Roy stole a quick look. He caught the red dress and a white rose, turned away, then came quickly back for another take, drawn by the feeling that her smile was for him. Now why would she do that? A pitch streaked toward him. Toomey had pulled a fast one. With a sob, Roy fell back and swung. The ball began to climb. The second baseman stabbed high for it, but it leaped over his straining fingers, sailed through the light, and up into the dark. Roy circled the bases like a Mississippi steamboat. The Knights poured out of their dugout to pound his back, and hundreds of their rooters hopped about in the field. He stood on the home base, lifting his cap to the lady's empty seat. And though Fowler goose-egged the Cubs in the last of the ninth and got credit for the win, everybody knew it was Roy alone who had saved the boy's life. It seemed perfectly natural to Iris to be waiting for him, with her shoes off to ease her feet here on the park grass. He had been in her mind so often in the past month, she could not conceive of him as a stranger, though he certainly was. A horn hooted. It was Roy driving a hired car. She slipped on her shoes and waved she was coming. He had come across her picture in one of the morning papers the day after he had knocked out the homer for the kid. Whenever he had a minute to himself, he was a smashing success at bat, 5 for 5, 3 home runs, and was lionized by all. He took the picture out and studied it, trying to figure out why she had done that for him. Nobody else ever had. He telephoned the photographer, but at his office they said he was covering a forest fire in Minnesota. During the game that afternoon, Roy scanned the stands around him and in the 5th frame located her practically at his elbow in deep left. He got one of the ushers to take her a note saying could she meet him tonight. She wrote back not tonight, but enclosed her phone number. After a shot of scotch, he called her. After some coaxing, she yielded. He held the door open and she stepped in. "I'm Iris Lemon," she said with a blush. Roy Hobbs. She was heavier than he had thought. Big, yes, but shapely too. So he asked her right out, was she married? She smiled. "No. Are you?" "Nope." Iris felt she had been mistaken to come. He looked disappointingly different from what she had expected. In street clothes he gained little and lost more, a warrior's quality he had showed in his uniform. Whatever difference could it have made to her that this particular one had slumped? She was amazed at her sentimentality. They drove along the lit highway to where the lake turned up into Indiana, and they could see the lumpy yellow dunes along the shore. Roy turned into a winding dirt road, and before long they came to this deserted beach, enclosed in a broken arc of white birches. They walked along the shore and then to a cluster of birches. Iris sat on the ground under one of the trees and slipped off her shoes. Her movements were graceful. She made her big feet seem small. He sat nearby, his eyes on her. He asked her why she had stood up for him the other night. "I don't know," Iris sighed. "You're a Knights fan, ain't you?" "No." "Then how come? I don't get it." "I like to read about the different players." "You read about my slump?" "Yes, and before that of your triumphs." "Ever see me play before the other night?" She shook her head. "Once then, and again yesterday." "Why'd you come the first time?" She rubbed her cigarette into the dirt. "Because I hate to see a hero fail. There are so few of them." She said it seriously, and he felt she meant it. "I felt that if you knew people believed in you, you'd regain your power. That's why I stood up. I hadn't meant to before I came. It happened naturally." "Were you praying for me to smack one over the roof?" "I hoped you might become yourself again." "I was jinxed," Roy explained to her. "But when you stood up, and I saw you with that red dress on, and thought to myself, she is with me, even if nobody else is, it broke the whammy." Iris laughed. Roy crawled over to her and laid his head in her lap. "I sure am glad you didn't stand me up," he sighed. "Who would?" she smiled. "You don't know the half of it." She softly said she was willing to. Roy struggled with himself. The urge to tell her was strong. On the other hand, talk about his inner self was always like plowing up a graveyard. "Everything came out different than I thought." His eyes were clouded. She waited. "I had a lot to give this game." "Life?" "Baseball. If I had started out 15 years ago like I'd tried to, I'd have been the king of them all by now." "The king of what?" "The best in the game." She sighed deeply. "You're so good now." "I'd have been better. I'd have broke most every record there was." "Does that mean so much to you?" "Sure," he answered. "What happened 15 years ago, Roy?" Roy felt like crying. Yet, he told her. The first one he ever had. I was just a kid, and I got shot by this batty dame on the night before my tryout, and after that, I just couldn't get started again. I lost my confidence, and everything I did flopped. He said this was the shame of his life, that his fate somehow had always been the same. Defeat in sight of his goal. What beats me, he said with a trembling voice, is why did it have to happen to me? What did I do to deserve it? Being stopped before you started? He nodded. Perhaps it was because you were a good person. How's that? Experience makes good people better. She was staring at the lake. Well, how does it do that? Through their suffering. I had enough of that, he said in disgust. We have two lives, Roy. The life we learn with, and the life we live with after that. Suffering is what brings us toward happiness. Her cool fingers touched his eyelids. You broke my jinx, he muttered. I'm 33, she said, looking at the moonlit water. He whistled, but said, I'm no spring chicken either, honey. That won't come between us? What? My age? No. Roy suddenly sat up and bounced to his feet. Jesus, will you look at that water? What are we waiting for? He tore at his tie. She couldn't bring herself to remove her clothes in front of him, so she went back to the car and undressed there. He waited impatiently, then she stepped out and ran straight into the water. Roy plunged in after her. He dived neatly and came up almost under her. Iris fell back out of his reach and swam away. He pursued her with less skill than she had, but more strength. At first he damn near froze, but as he swam his blood warmed. She would not stop, and before long the white birches near the beach looked to be the size of matchsticks. They swam in together, taking their time. As they dragged themselves out of the water, she said, Go make a fire. Otherwise we will have nothing to dry ourselves with. Before long he had a roaring blaze going. The fire reddened the water and the lacy birches. It reddened her naked body. Her thighs and rump were broad, but her waist was narrow and virginal. Her breasts were hard, shapely. From above her hips she looked like a girl, but the lower half of her looked like a woman. She was sitting close to the fire with her hair pulled over her head so the inside would dry first. She looked up and said in a tremulous voice, Roy, I have a confession to make. I was never married, but I am the mother of a grown girl. She brushed her hair back with her fingers. I want to tell you I made a mistake long ago and had a hard time afterwards. The child meant everything to me and made me happy. I gave her a good upbringing, and now she is grown and on her own. The flame sank low. When they had just about been sucked into the ashes, he crept toward her and took her in his arms. Her breasts beat like hearts against him. He smiled, never so relaxed in sex. But while he was in the middle of loving her, she spoke. I forgot to tell you, I am a grandmother. He stopped. Holy Jesus. After a hilarious celebration on the train, Roy slept restlessly. The Knights had come out of Sportsman's Park after trouncing the Cards and making it an even dozen in a row without a loss. Roy was once again the king of the Clouders, whose sensational hitting, pulverizing every kind of pitching, more than made up for his slump. When the diner opened in the morning, he put away an enormous breakfast and afterwards found himself some privacy in a half-empty coach near the engine. For a while he stared at the scattered outskirts of the city they were passing through, but in reality he was wondering whether to read the fat letter from Iris Lemon he had been carrying around in his suit pocket. Roy recalled the night on the lake shore, the long swim, the fire, and after. The memory was not unpleasant, but what for the love of mud had made her take him for a sucker who would be interested in a grandmother? It was simple enough to him. If he got serious with her, it could only lead to one thing, him being a grandfather. God save him from that. That was what he told himself as the train sped east, and though he had a slight bellyache, he fell into a sound sleep. He awoke with Memo on his mind. To his wonder, she turned up in his room in Boston the next night. Memo laughingly said she had been visiting a girlfriend's summer place on the Cape and had heard the boys were in town, so she stopped off to say hello. His face must have shown more than he intended, because she turned to the window and said, "Roy, don't bawl me out for not seeing you for a while. There are some things I just can't take, and one of them is being with people who are blue. That's why I had to stand off to the side and wait until you had worked out of it. Now here I am, the first chance I got, and that is the way it used to be between Bump and me." Roy said soberly, "When are you going to find out that I ain't Bump, Memo?" "Don't be mad," she said, lifting her face to him. She was close and warm-breathed. He caught her in his arms, and she snuggled tight, but when he tried to edge her to the bed, she broke for air and said no. "Why not?" he demanded. "I'm not well," said Memo. He was suspicious. "What's wrong?" Memo laughed. "Sometimes you are very innocent, Roy. When a girl says she is not well, does she have to draw you a map?" The Knights took their 3 in Boston, and the next day won a twilight doubleheader in Ebbets Field, making it 17 straight wins on the comeback climb. They were within 2 of the Phils, who had been nip and tucking it all season with the Cards and Dodgers. The Pirates were still in first place, 2 games ahead of the Phils. Roy had a date with Memo coming up, but he was lonely for her one night, so he went up to the 4th floor and rang her buzzer. She opened the door, dressed in black lounging pajamas with a black ribbon tied around her horsetail of red hair. Memo's face lit in a slow blush. "Why, Roy," she said, and seemed not to know what else to say. "Shut the door," came a man's voice from inside, "or I might catch a cold." "Gus is here," Memo explained quickly. "Come on in." Gus Sands, smoking a between-the-acts little cigar, was sitting at a table near the curtained window, examining a hand of double solitaire he and Memo had been playing. Gus said, "Welcome home, slugger. I see you've climbed out of the hole that you were in." "I suppose it cost you a couple of bucks," said Roy. Gus was forced to laugh. "What'll it be, slugger?" he said, collecting the cards. "Pinochle is the game for 3. "I hate pinochle," Memo said. "Let's play poker."
Poker is not wise now," Gus said. "The one in the middle gets squeezed. Anybody like to shoot crap?"
He brought forth a pair of green dice. Roy said he was agreeable, and Memo nodded. Gus wanted to roll on the table, but Roy said the rug was better, with the dice bouncing against the wall. They moved the table and squatted on the floor. Roy, kneeling, rolled first. Before he was through, Gus owed him 1,100. When Roy finally hit 7, Memo got up and said she had to make coffee. Gus and Roy played on, but Roy was still the lucky one. Gus said the dice ought never to be played with less than 4 and gave up in disgust. He dusted off his knees.
"Well, you sure had luck in your pants tonight, slugger."
"Some call it that." Gus handed him a check for 2,100.
"Chicken feed," he said.
Roy gave the paper a loud smack with his lips. "I love it." Gus dropped his guard and pinned his restless eye on Roy.
"Say the word, slugger, and you can make yourself a nice pile of dough, quick."
Roy wasn't sure he had heard right. Gus repeated the offer. This time Roy was sure. "Say it again, and I will spit in your good eye." Gus's grayish complexion turned blue. "Boys," Memo said uneasily. Gus stalked into the bathroom. Memo's face was pale. "Help me with the sandwiches, Roy." "Did you hear what that bastard said to me?" "Sometimes he talks through his hat." "Why do you invite him here?" She turned away. He invited himself. The Pirates blew into town for their last games of the year with the Knights, a series of 4. Thus far during the season, they had trounced the Knights a fantastic 15-3 and were prepared to blast them out of their field. Most everyone kissed this game goodbye, although Roy started with a homer his first time up. Schultz then gave up 2 runs to the Pirates. Roy hit another round tripper. Schultz made it 3 for the Pirates. Roy ended by slamming 2 more homers, and that did it, 4-3. The Phils were now in first place by a game, the Pirates second, and the Knights were 1 behind them and coming up. The race went touch and go. To begin with, the Knights dropped a squeaker. Roy went absolutely hitless to the Dodgers as the Pirates won and the Phils lost, both now running neck and neck for first, the Knights 2 behind. Just as the boys were again despairing of themselves, Roy got after the ball again. He did not let on to anyone, but he had undergone a terrible day after his slaughter of the Pirates, a day of great physical weakness, a strange draining of strength from his arms and legs, followed by a splitting headache that whooshed in his ears. However, in the second game at Ebbets Field, he took hold of himself, gripped Wonder Boy, and bashed the first pitch into the clock on the right field wall. After that, the Dodgers never knew what time it was. All they knew was that Roy Hobbs shot them dead 3 times. Carried on by the momentum, the Knights ripped the Braves, brutally trounced the Reds, and wiped the stunned Phils off the map. When the shouting stopped, the Knights were undeniably on top by 3 over the Pirates, the Phils third by 1 more. With 3 last ones to play against the lowly Reds, the Knights looked in. The ride home from Philadelphia took a little more than an hour. Roy was thinking of Memo. His heart ached the way he yearned for her. He felt better at the hotel to find a note from Memo in his mailbox, saying to come up and celebrate with a drink. She greeted him at the door with a fresh kiss, her face flushed with how glad she was, saying, "Well, Roy, you've really done it. Everybody is talking about what a marvel you are." "We still got this last one to take," he said. He pulled her close. She kissed for kiss with her warm, wet mouth. Now is the time, he thought. Backing her against the wall, he slowly rubbed his hand up between her thighs. There were tears in her eyes. He lifted her in his arms and laid her down on the couch. She sat bolt upright. "Oh, for Christ's sakes, Memo, I am a grown guy and not a kid. When are you going to be nice to me?" "Later," she sighed. "Tonight." "You are my sugar honey," he kissed her. Her mood quickly changed. "Come on, let's celebrate." "Celebrate what?" "About the team." Surprised she wanted to do that now, he said he was shaved and ready to go. She explained that she had prepared a snack in one of the party rooms upstairs. "They're bringing it all up from the kitchen. I thought it'd be fun to get some girls together with the boys and all enjoy ourselves." She had gone to all the trouble, and he wanted to please her. Nor was the mention of food exactly distasteful to him. Memo served him a drink and finished telephoning the men she couldn't reach before. Some, mindful of the game, were doubtful, but Memo convinced them by saying that Roy and others were coming. At 10 o'clock, they rode up to the 18th floor. The party was already on. Someone was pounding the keys of the upright piano against the wall. On the other side of the room, a chef stood behind a long cloth-covered table. "Sure is some snack," Roy marveled. "You must have hocked your fur coat." "Gus chipped in," Memo said absently. "Is that Abe coming up here?" She looked hurt. "Don't call him dirty names." "2 bits he had the grub poisoned." "That's not funny." Memo walked away, but Roy went after her and apologized. He was now worried how Pop would take it if he found out about the players celebrating too soon. He asked Memo if the manager knew what was going on. She was sweet again. "Don't get anxious about the party because Gus said not to serve any hard liquor." Good old Gus. Must be laying his paper on us for a change." Memo made no reply. Everybody was there by then. The cigar smoke was thick. To Roy, things still didn't sit just right. Everybody was watching everybody else as if they were all waiting for a signal to get up and leave. Flores, from across the room, stared at Roy with black, mournful eyes, but Roy turned away. He couldn't walk out on Memo. "What'll it be?" said the little chef. He had a large fork and plate poised, but Roy took them from him and said he would fix what he wanted himself. Memo helped. "Hey, don't be stingy, Roy." "Pile it on, honey. You sure are a scream the way you eat." After his plate was loaded, Memo placed a slice of ham and a roll on her own, and they sat at a table in the far corner of the room so Roy could concentrate on the food. Memo watched him, fascinated. He was gobbling it down, and it gave him a feeling of both having something and wanting it the same minute he was having it, and every mouthful seemed to have the effect of increasing his desire for her. Roy didn't realize it till she mentioned it that his plate was empty. "Let me get you some more, hon." "I'll get it myself." Food is a woman's work. She took his plate to the table, and the busy little chef heaped it high with corned beef, pastrami, turkey, potato salad, cheese, and pickles. "You sure are nice to me," he said. "You're a nice guy." A group of girls flocked through the door, and Memo excused herself. She welcomed them and introduced them around. Dancing started, and the party got livelier. Roy polished his plate with a crust of bread. He felt as if he had hardly eaten anything. It was sliced so thin you could hardly chew your teeth into it. He felt depressed. He had the old feeling he was down on his hands and knees searching for something that he couldn't find. Flore stood at the table. "If you tell them to go home," he hissed, "they will." Roy stared. "Tell who?" "The players. They are afraid to stay here, but they don't go because you stay." "Go ahead and tell them to go." "You tell them," Flores urged. "They will listen to your word." "Right," said Roy. Memo returned and Flores left him. Roy struggled to his feet, broke into a sweat, and sat down again. Fowler grabbed Memo, and they whirled around. Roy pushed himself up and walked stiffly to the door. Memo saw him. She waved gaily and kept on dancing. He dragged his belly through the hall. When the elevator came, it dropped him down in the lobby. He went along the corridor into the grill room. Carefully sitting down at the table, he ordered 6 hamburgers and 2 tall glasses of milk. A hand whacked him across the shoulders. It was Red Blow. "Now don't eat too much crap. We have a big day coming up." "I'm just taking a little bite." "You better get to bed and have plenty of sleep." Roy nodded. "Take care of yourself, fella. Tomorrow's our day. Pop'll dance a jig after tomorrow, and you'll be his hero." Roy didn't answer. Red smiled a little sadly. "I'm going to be sorry when it's over." He got up and left. The hamburgers were not satisfying, but the milk was. He made a mental note to drink more milk. He paid and left. The elevator went up like a greased shot. As it stopped, he felt a ripping pain in the floor of his stomach. He stumbled out. He stood alone in the hall, trying to figure it out. He rested, and the pain left him. The party was quiet. The lights were dimmed, and there was some preliminary sex work going on. He searched for Memo to tell her it was time. He couldn't find her, so he left and reeled down the stairs to the 4th floor. He found the key left in the lock and softly turned it. She was lying naked in bed, chewing a turkey drumstick. "You frightened me, Roy." He unzipped his fly. Her green eyes closely watched him, her belly heaving above the red flame. Undressing caused him great distress. Inside him they were tearing up a street. The sweat dripped from his face. Yet there was music, the sweetest piping he had ever heard. Dropping his pants, he approached for the piping fulfillment. She drew her legs back. Her expression puzzled him. It was not... Well, the lights were wavering, blinking on and off. A thundering locomotive roared through the mountain. A bolt of shuddering lightning came at him and socked him in the shattered gut. He lived a pain he could not believe existed. Roy thudded to his knees and keeled over. Judge Banner had a contract with a hospital near Knightsfield to treat all player emergencies, so that was where they had rushed Roy. The city was aghast. Crowds gathered outside, waiting for bulletins. The doctors adopted a policy of watchful waiting and held off anything drastic. Roy chattered and steamed, rarely conscious, tormented by his dreams, delirious. They strapped him down, and there he lay a prisoner, as the frightened knights dropped the 3rd of 3 hot potatoes to the last-place Reds. Since the resurgent pirates had scattered the brains of the Phils, the season ended in a dead heat. A single playoff game in Knights Field was arranged for Monday next, the day before the World Series. Late that afternoon, the fever abated. He returned to consciousness and recognized a harried Memo at his bedside. From her, he learned what had happened to the team and groaned in anguish. When she left, he discovered his troubles had only just begun. The specialist, a tall, stoop-shouldered man with a white mustache, gave Roy a bill of particulars. He began by telling him there wasn't much doubt he would participate in the Monday playoff. He could play, yes, though he'd not feel at his best, nor would he be able to extend himself so far as he would like. However, all good news has its counterpart, he said, and to prove the point, let it come out that it would be best for Roy to say goodbye forever to baseball, if he hoped to stay alive. His blood pressure, at times amazingly high, complicated by an athlete's heart, could conceivably cause his sudden death if he were to attempt to play next season. The doctor departed. Roy felt that this giant hand holding a club had broken through the clouds and with a single blow crushed his skull. He lived in the thought of death. Something in him said the old boy was right. He felt he had for years suspected something wrong, and this was it. Too much pressure in the pipes. Blew your conch off. He was through. Finished. Only he couldn't believe it. Me. I, Roy Hobbs, forever out of the game? Inconceivable. Maybe White Mustache was wrong. Maybe he was 100% dead wrong. The next evening he sneaked out of the building. A cab got him to Knight's Field, and Happy Pellers, the astonished groundskeeper, let him in. A phone call brought Dizzy to the scene. Roy changed into uniform, and Happy donned catcher's gear. Dizzy prepared to pitch. Happy switched on the night floods to make things clearer. Dizzy practiced a few pitches and then served one over the middle. As he swung, Roy felt a jet of steam blow through the center of his skull. They gathered him up, bundled him into a cab, and got him back to the hospital where nobody had missed him. Roy made the specialist promise to tell no one about his condition. Mostly his thoughts were dismal. That frightened feeling. Bust before beginning. He lay for hours staring at the window. Often the glass looked wet, though it wasn't raining. When the feeling passed, there was the necessity of making new choices. Since it was already the end of the season, he had about 4 months in which to cash in on testimonials, endorsements, personal appearances, and such like. But what after that? When spring training time came, he dared not think. Saturday night he awoke from an after-supper nap more gloomy than ever, so he reached under his pillow for Iris's letter. But just then, Memo came into the room with an armful of flowers, so he let it lay where it was. She appeared worn out now, with bluish shadows under her eyes. She had days ago sorrowed it was her fault that this had happened to the team. How stupid not to have waited just a day or two more before celebrating. Pop, she wept, had called her filthy names. She had despaired every minute, really despaired, up to the time she heard he was going to be in the playoff. Memo stood at the open window, gazing down into the darkening street. "Oh, Roy, I can't stand it any longer, I can't." He sat up. "What's wrong?" "It's just that I'm fed up," she wept. "Fed up. Pop is terrible to me, and I don't want to go on living off him, even if he is my uncle." "Oh, don't cry, Memo. Just say the word, and I'll take care of you." In a cracked voice he said, "Just marry me." She stopped crying and said, "Would you have me, Roy?" He swayed with emotion as he got out thickly, "Would I?" She came to him, her white hands clasped. "There's one thing you have to understand, Roy, and then maybe you won't want me. That is that I'm afraid to be poor." She said it with intensity, her face turning dark at her words. "You understand that, don't you, Roy?" He nodded. "We have to face it," she said. "You're 35 now, and that don't give you much time left as a ball player." "What do you mean?" he asked. Deadpan. But it wasn't his blood pressure she was referring to. For a minute, he was afraid she'd found out. "Even if I had to quit right now, I could still scrounge up about 25 grand in the next few months. That's a lot of dough." She seemed doubtful. "What would you do with it?" "We'd get hitched, and I would invest in a business. Everybody does that." "What kind of business?" Memo asked. "I can't say for sure. Maybe a restaurant." She made a face. "What do you have in mind?" Roy asked. "Oh, something big, Roy. I would like you to buy into a company where you could have an executive job." "How much dough do we need?" "I should think more than 25,000. He gulped. "Around 35? More like 50. Roy frowned, but Memo was right. He pondered where to get another 25,000. He lay back with his eyes shut. Memo whispered something. His lids flew open. "Who sent you?" He spoke harshly. "That bastard, Gus?" She turned flame-faced, but answered quietly, "The judge." "Banner?" Roy's pulses banged. "He said he'd pay you 15,000 now and more next season. He says it would depend on you." "I thought I smelled skunk." "He asked me to deliver the message. I have nothing to do with it." "What does he want me to do?" "It's something about the playoff. I don't know." "They want me to drop it?" She didn't answer. "No," he said out loud. She shrugged. "I told him you wouldn't." He fell into a deep slumber, but had not slept very long before the lights went on and waked him. Judge Goodwill Banner, in dark glasses and hairy black fedora, was staring at him from the foot of the bed. "What the hell do you want here?"
"Don't be alarmed," the judge rumbled.
"I got nothing to say to you." The judge sucked an unwilling flame into his King Oscar and tossed the burnt-out match on the floor.
"I assume that Miss Paris has acquainted you with the terms of a certain proposal."
"Leave her name out of it."
"Quite so. I believe she erred concerning the emolument offered. 15,000, was it? My understanding is that 20,000, payable in cash in one sum, is closer to the correct amount."
"What for?"
"I frankly confess it is insurance. There is the possibility that you may get into the game and unexpectedly wreck it with a single blow. I personally doubt this will occur, but we prefer to take no chances."
"Don't kid yourself that I am too weak to play. You know that the doctor himself said I'll be there Monday."
The judge hesitated. 25,000, he finally said. "Absolutely my last offer."
Roy pulled the covers over his head. "Go home." The judge didn't move.
"There is also the matter of next season's contract."
Roy listened. Would there ever be a next season? He uncovered his head. "How much?"
"I shall offer, provided we agree on the other matter, a substantial raise."
"Talk figures."
45,000 for the season. We might also work out some small percentage on the gate."
25,000 for dropping the game is not enough," said Roy. As he spoke, an icicle of fright punctured his spine. The judge scowled and drew on his half-gone cigar.
30, he said, "and no more."
35, Roy got out.
"Utterly outrageous,"
snapped the judge. "Well, don't slam the door on your way out." The judge wiped his perspiring face with his dirty handkerchief.
"You are impossible to deal with, but I accept."
His voice was flat, but Roy said he had changed his mind. The judge then hissed,
"You may lose Miss Paris to someone else if you are not careful."
Roy bolted up. "To who, for instance?"
"A better provider."
"You mean Gus Sands?" Roy lay back. Then he asked, "What if I couldn't lose the game by myself? The Pirates ain't exactly world beaters. We roasted them the last 7 times. The boys might do it again even if I didn't hit a thing." The judge rubbed his scaly hands.
"We have made the necessary arrangements to take care of that."
Roy was up again. "You mean there's somebody else in on this deal?" The judge smiled around his cigar. "In that case," Roy said slowly,
"The 35,000 is final."
"With 45 for the contract?"
"Agreed. You understand you are not under any circumstances to hit the ball safely."
After a minute, Roy said slowly, "I will take the pitch."
"I beg your pardon."
"The fix is on." On the morning of the game, Roy felt weak as piss and was dreading it. He hoped Pop would guess how shaky he was and bench him. What a laugh that would be on the judge. Serve the bastard right. Pop poked his baldy out of his door and called for Roy. Roy got up and went into the office. For an unsufferable time, Pop failed to speak. Roy examined his fingernails. Pop sighed.
"Roy, it's my own fault."
Made Roy edgy. "What is?"
"Oh, this mess that we're now in. I kept you on the bench for 3 solid weeks in June. If I hadn't done that foolish thing, we'd have finished the season at least half a dozen games out in front."
Roy offered no reply.
"But your own mistake is a bad one, too."
Roy nodded.
"A bad one, with the team right on top of hooking the pennant."
Pop shook his head. Yet he said he wouldn't blame Roy too much because it wasn't entirely of his own doing. Roy got up.
"You always sit down."
Pop bent forward.
"We can win today."
His cold breath smelled bad. Roy drew his head back.
"Well, we can, can't we?"
He nodded.
"Oh, gee, what's the matter with you?"
"I feel weak," Roy said, "and I'm not betting how I will hit today." Pop's voice got kindly again. "Oh, I say we can win it whichever way you feel. If the rest of those birds see you hustling, they will break their backs to win. All they gotta feel is there's somebody on this team who thinks they can." And then he said, "Roy, I would give my whole life to win this game and take the pennant. Promise me you'll go in there and do your damnedest." "I will go in," Roy sighed. The Pirates flipped through their practice and the game began. Pop had picked Fowler to start for the Knights. Roy figured that he knew who was in this deal with him. Leave it to the judge to tie the bag in the most economical way, with the best hitter and pitcher. However, as he watched Fowler pitch during the first inning, he wasn't certain he was the one. He got rid of the first two Pirates with ease. Maybe he was playing it cagey first off. Time would tell. Roy's thoughts were broken up by the crack of a bat. The third man up had taken hold of one, and it was arcing into deep left. It occurred to Roy that although he had promised the judge he wouldn't hit, he had made no commitments as to catching them. He ran several shaky steps and made a throbbing stab at the ball, spearing it on the half run for the third out. As he did so, he noticed a movement up in the tower window and saw the judge's stout figure pressed against the glass. To nobody's surprise, Dutch Vogelman went out to the mound for the Pirates. He knocked the first three Knights off without half trying, including Flores, who was no easy victim. Roy had no chance to bat, for which he felt relieved. But after Fowler had also rubbed out the opposition, he was first up in the second inning. The stands were hushed. Everybody remembered the 4 homers he had got off Vogelman the last time he had faced him. What they didn't know was that Roy had been struck giddy with weakness. His heart whammed like a wheezing steam engine. His head felt nailed to a pole. His eardrums throbbed and his arms hung like dead weights. As he was slowly getting set, he sneaked a cautious glance up at the tower, and it did not exactly surprise him that Memo, still in black, was standing at the window next to the judge. The ball was a whizzer but dripping lard. Weak as he felt, Roy had to smile at what he could really do to that baby if he had his heart set on it. But he swung the slightest bit too late, grunting as the ball shot past Wonder Boy and plunked in the pocket of the catcher's glove. Vogelman then tried a low-breaking curve that Roy had to take for ball 1. The pitcher came back with a foolish floater that he pretended to almost break his back reaching after. Strike 2. There were only 3. He closed his eyes before the next pitch in the hope it would be quickly called against him, but it curved out for a right ball 2. Opening his lids, he saw Mercy in a nearby seat, gazing at him with a malevolent sneer. "You too, Max," Roy thought, tightening his hold on the bat. Vogelman blistered across a hot, somewhat high one, not too bad to miss, and that made it 3 and out. Otto Zip held his nose and pulled the chain, and Roy, quivering, threw Wonder Boy aside. Some in the front boxes let out a gasp, and returned empty-handed to the bench. The judge and Memo had gone from the tower window. As the Pirates came to bat for their half of the third, there were no Knight hits after Roy struck out. A breeze blew dust all over the place. Neither team scored in either the third or fourth. In the fifth came his next turn, again first up, a small break. The stands awoke and began a rhythmic clapping. "Lift that pill, Roy. Bust its guts. Make it bleed. You can do it, kid." "You can do it," Pop hollered from the dugout steps. With a heavy heart, Roy pulled himself up to the plate. Vogelman, despite Roy's strikeout, was burdened with worry over what he still might do. By wide margins, his first 2 throws were balls. To help him out, Roy swung under the third pitch. Roy thought he better foul the next one for strike 2, but Vogelman wouldn't let him, throwing almost over his head. Remembering he could walk if he wanted to, Roy waited. There was no harm to anybody in that, and it would look better for him. The next pitch came in too close, and that was how he got to first and the judge again to the window. But it made no difference one way or the other, for though Lejong sacrificed him to second, Gabby slashed a high one across the diamond, which the second baseman jumped for, and he tagged Roy for an unassisted double play. Dave Olson opened the 6th with the Knights' first hit, a thumping double. But Benz went down swinging, then Fowler bunted into another quick DP. Roy wondered about that bunt. He had a notion Fowler would commit himself soon because time was on the go. But Fowler didn't, making it another sweep of 3 Pirates. He had thus far given up only 2 safeties. In the 7th, the Knights, sensing Vogelman was tiring, found their way to him. Allie Stubbs chopped a grass cutter through a hole in the infield for a single. Baker, attempting to lay down a bunt, was over-anxious and struck out. And then Flores lifted one just above the first baseman's frantic fingers, and Stubbs, running with his head down, sprang safely into third. Roy was on deck, but with 2 on base, his heart misgave him. The crowd jumped to its feet, roaring for him to come through. As he approached the plate, the sun, that had been plumbing the clouds since the game began, at last broke through and bathed the stadium in a golden glow. As the warmth fell upon him, Roy felt a sob break in his throat. The weakness left his legs, his heart beat steadily, his giddy gut tightened, and he stood firm and strong upon the earth. His eyes scanned the forward rows and left field, but stopped at Zip's surly face. He felt suddenly anguished at what he had promised the judge. On his first swing, at a bad pitch, Otto let out a stream of jeers, oaths, and horn hoots that burned Roy to his bones. "I will get that little ass-faced bastard." On the next pitch, he shortened his hold on Wonderboy, stepped in front of the ball, and pulled it sharply foul. The ball whizzed past Otto's nose. The dwarf jumped up and down in his seat, shook his fist, and screeched curses. "Carrion! Awful! Turd! Flush the bowl!" Roy tried to send the next ball through his teeth. It hit the rail and bounced into the air. A fan behind Otto caught it in his straw hat. Though the crowd laughed, the boos at Roy grew louder. Roy chopped a 3rd foul at the dwarf. With a shriek, he covered his face with his arms and ducked. Several rows up from Otto, a dark-haired woman in a white dress had risen and was standing alone amid the crowd. Christ, another one, Roy thought. At the last split second, he had tried to hold his swing, but couldn't. The ball spun like a shot at Otto, struck his hard skull with a thud, and was deflected upward. It caught the lady in the face, and she went down. Stuffy Briggs called time. Roy dropped his bat, hopped into the boxes, and ran up the stairs. There was a crowd pressed around her. They let Roy through. A doctor was attending her, but she was stretched out, unconscious. Roy already knew who it was. "Iris," he groaned. Iris woke and sighed. "Roy." Lifting her in his arms, he carried her to the clubhouse. He gently laid her on the trainer's table. The left side of her face was hurt, bruised, and rainbow-colored. Her eye was black and the lid thick. The doctor went out to call an ambulance. Roy closed the door after him. "Oh, Roy," sighed Iris. "Iris, I'm sorry. Roy, you must win," he groaned. "Why didn't you come here before? My letter, you never answered." He bowed his head. "You must win, Roy," said Iris. "Win for our boy." He stared at her. "What boy?" "I am pregnant." There were tears in her eyes. Her belly was slender. Then the impact hit him. Holy Jesus! In the dugout, Pop confronted him with withering curses. "Oh, John, get in there and attend to business." Roy nodded. Climbing out of the dugout, he found Wonderboy lying near the water fountain. Stuffy called time in, and the Pirates returned to their positions, Allie and Flores to third and first, and Roy stepped into the batter's box to face a storm of Bronx cheers. It was 0-2 on him because, except for the one he had purposely missed, Roy had turned each pitch into a foul. He watched Vogelman with burning eyes. Vogelman was almost hypnotized. His next throw was wide of the plate, ball 1. Then a quick ball 2, and the pitcher was nervous again. He took a very long time with the next throw, but the pellets slipped away from him and hit the dirt just short of the plate, and that was ball 3. Roy now prayed for a decent throw. Vogelman glanced at Allie, edging into a lead again, kicked, and threw almost in desperation. Roy swung from his cleats. Thunder crashed. Some of the fans had seen lightning. Most of them were on their feet, raving at the flight of the ball. Allie had raced in to score, so had Flores, and Roy was heading into second when the umpire waved them all back. The ball had landed clearly foul. The fans groaned. Wonderboy lay on the ground, split lengthwise, one half pointing to first, the other to third. The Knight's bat boy collected both the pieces and thrust a Louisville slugger into Roy's limp hand. The crowd sat in raw silence as Vogelman delivered his next pitch. It floated in, perfect for pickling, but Roy failed to lift the bat. Lajong, who followed, also struck out. With the Knights back in the field, Fowler quickly gave up a whacking triple to the first Pirate hitter. This was followed by a hard double, and almost before any of the stunned fans could realize it, the first run of the game was in. The next Pirate laced a long hopper to left. Roy tore in for the ball, made a running jab for it, and held it. He heaved to third, holding both runners to one bag. He knew now he was right about Fowler. The pitcher had pulled the plug. Roy signaled time and drifted in to talk to him. Roy spoke in a low voice. "Watch out, kid. We don't want to lose the game." Fowler studied him craftily. "Cut the crap, big shot. A lot of winning you've been doing." "Throw the ball good," Roy advised him. "I will when you start hitting it." "Listen," Roy said patiently. "This might be my last season. You want it to be yours?" Fowler paled. "You wouldn't dare open your trap. Try something funny again and you will see." Fowler somehow managed to keep the next two men from connecting, and everybody said too bad that Roy hadn't given him that pep talk after the first hit. Every time Vogelman put Roy away, he felt infinitely better. Consequently, his pitching improved as the game progressed. Though he was surprised in the eighth to have Gabby Laszlo touch him for a sharp single, he forced Olson to pop to short, Benz to line to him, and Fowler obliged by biting at 3 gamey ones for the last out. Fowler, despite Roy's good advice, got sloppier in his throwing, only his support was a whole lot better than he had hoped for, and neither of the first two Pirates up in the ninth, though they had walloped the ball hard, could land on base. Flores nailed both shots. The third Pirate then pulled out a high looping beauty to left, but Roy speared it against the wall. He felt confident that the boys would hold him a turn at bat, and he would destroy Vogelman and save the game, the most important thing he ever had to do in his life. Pop called Ed Simmons to pinch hit, but Vogelman, working with renewed speed and canniness, got Ed to hit a soft one to center field. Pop called Hank Kelly, another pinch hitter. Vogelman struck him out. He dried his mouth on his sleeve, smiling faintly to himself for the first time since the game began. One more, the Mex. To finish him meant slamming the door on Hobbs, a clean shutout. A hush hung like a smell in the air. Flores faced the pitcher. Fouling the first throw, he took for a ball and swung savagely at the third pitch. He missed. 2 strikes. There were only 3. Roy felt himself slowly dying. At least if he were up there batting. The Mexican's face was lit in anguish. He rushed at the next throw and swung. The ball took off and leaped for the right field wall. Running as though death dogged him, Flores made it, sliding headlong into third. Vogelman, drained of his heart's blood, stared at him through glazed eyes. The silence shattered into insane, raucous noise. Roy rose from the bench. Pop's haunted gleam settled on him, wavered, traveled down the line of grim faces, and came back to Roy. He called his name. "See what we have come to, Roy?" Roy stared at the dugout floor. "Let me go in." "What would you expect to do?" "Murder it." "Murder which?" "The ball. I swear." "Go on in," Pop said. He added an afterthought, "Keep us alive." Roy selected out of the rack a bat that looked something like Wonder Boy. He swung it once and advanced. Home plate lay under a deepening, dusty shadow, but Roy saw things with more light than he ever had before. A hit, tying up the game, would cure what ailed him. Only a homer, with himself scoring the winning run, would truly redeem him. Vogelman was contemplating how close he had come to paradise. The sight of his nemesis crouched low in the brooding darkness around the plate filled him with fear. Sighing, he brought himself without conviction to throw. "Pull one!" The next one went in cap high. "Ball!" Wicket, the Pirate manager, ambled out to the mound. "What's the matter, Dutch?" "Take me out of here," Vogelman moaned. "What the hell for? You got that bastard 3 times so far, and you can do it again. He gives me the shits, Walt. Look at him standing there like a goddamn gorilla. Look at his burning eyes. He ain't human." Wicket talked low as he studied Roy. "That ain't what I see. He looks old and beat up. They say he could drop dead any minute." He left the mound. Vogelman threw the next ball with his flesh, screaming, "Ball 3!" He sought for Wicket, but the manager kept his face hidden. Vogelman looked and saw Roy, in full armor, mounted on a black charger, coming at him with a long lance as thick as a young tree. He rubbed his arm across his eyes and keeled over in a dead faint. A roar ascended skywards. Wicket raised his arm aloft to the center field bullpen. The boy who had been pitching began the long trek in. He was 20, a scrawny youth with light eyes.
Herman Youngberry, number 66, pitching for the Pirates.
He had come to the Pirates on the 1st of September from one of their Class A clubs to help in the pennant drive. Since then, he'd worked up a 3-1, 2-loss record. Despite the rest he had had, Roy's armpits were creepy with sweat. He felt a bulk of heaviness around his middle, and that the individual hairs on his legs and chest were bristling. Roy had considered and decided against a surprise bunt. As things were, it was best to take 3 good swings. He felt the shadow of the judge and Memo fouling the air around him, and turned, but they had left the window. The ball lit its own path. The speed of the pitch surprised Stuffy Briggs, and it was a little time before he could work his tongue free. "Strike!" Roy's nose was full of the dust he had raised.
Throw him to the pigs!
Shrilled Otto Zip. If he bunted, the surprise could get him to first, and Flores home for the tying run. Roy stared at the kid, trying to hook his eye, but Youngberry wouldn't look at him. As Roy stared, a fog blew up around the young pitcher, full of old ghosts. The fog shot forth a snaky finger, and Roy carefully searched under it for the ball, but it was already in the catcher's mitt. "Strike 2!" It felt like winter. He wished for fire to warm his frozen fingers. Too late for the bunt now. He wished he had tried it. He would never give up, he swore. Roy caught the pitcher's eye. His own had blood in them. Youngberry shuddered. He threw a bad ball, but the batter leaped at it. He struck out with a roar. Otto Zip, carrying a dark lump on his noodle, dusted himself off, lit a cigar, and went home. When it was night, Roy dragged the 2 halves of the bat into left field, and with his jackknife cut a long rectangular slash into the turf and dug out the earth. He then placed the broken bat in it. He poured back the earth, carefully pressing it down, and replaced the grass. He trod on it in his stocking feet, and after a last long look around, walked off the field. In the clubhouse, the lights were left on with nobody there. He got rid of his uniform and the soiled clothes can, then dressed in street clothes. He felt something thick against his chest and brought out a sealed envelope. Tearing it open, he discovered a package of $1,000 bills. He had never seen one before, and here were 35. He tried to stuff them into his wallet. The wad was too thick, so he put them back in the envelope and slipped it into his pocket. The street was chill and his swaying lights dark. He shivered as he went to the corner. At the tower, he pulled himself up the unlit stairs. The judge's office was pitch black. He located the apartment door and stumbled up the narrow stairs. When he came into the judge's overstuffed apartment, they were all sitting around a table, Memo, the judge, and the supreme bookie enjoying a little cigar. They were counting piles of betting slips and a mass of bills. Memo was adding the figures with an adding machine. Gus got up quickly when he saw Roy. "Nice going, slugger," he said softly. Smiling, he advanced with his arm extended. "That was some fine show you put on today." Roy slugged him and he went down. His head hit the floor and the glass eye dropped out. Memo was furious. "Don't touch him, you big bastard. He's worth 1,000,000 of your kind." Roy said, "You act all right, Memo, but only like a whore." She ran to him and tried to scratch his eyes, but he pushed her aside and she fell over Gus. Roy took the envelope out of his pocket. He showered the $1,000 bills on the judge's head. The judge raised a revolver. "That will do, Hobbs. Another move and I shall be forced to defend myself." Roy snatched the gun and dropped it in the wastebasket. He twisted the judge's nose till he screamed. Then he lifted him onto the table and pounded his back with his fists. The judge made groans and pig squeals. With his foot, Roy shoved the carcass off the table. He lay moaning amid the betting slips and bills. Memo ran around the table to the basket. Raising the pistol, she shot at Roy's back. The bullet grazed his shoulder. Roy turned to her. "Don't come any nearer or I'll shoot." He slowly moved forward. "You filthy scum, I hate your guts and always have," she hissed. He gently took the gun from her, opened the cylinder, and shook out the cartridges into his palm. Going down the tower stairs, he fought his own overwhelming self-hatred. He thought, "I never did learn anything out of my past life. Now I have to suffer again." When he hit the street, he was exhausted. He had not shaved, and a black beard gripped his face. He felt old and grimy. He stared into faces of people he passed along the street. "He could have been a king," a woman remarked to a man. A boy thrust a newspaper at him. The headline screamed, "Suspicion of robbed sellout! Max Mercy!" And there was also a statement by the baseball commissioner. "If this report is true, that is the last of Roy Hobbs in organized baseball." Roy handed the paper back to the kid. "Say it ain't true, Roy." Roy lifted his hands to his face and wept many bitter tears.